Okay, my name is Markus Virta. For those of you who don't know me, I am the Director of Business Development and Sales at Western Solar, who is a small local installer here in Bellingham. And I'm also serving as on the Board of Directors of Solar Installers of Washington, which is our trade association that does all of our legislative and policy work in Olympia on behalf of the solar industry. David gave a really great overview on the kind of words associated with solar. Here's a simple drawing that we put together. It shows you've got panels on the roof, an inverter, number two, that switches the power from direct current that the solar modules are making to alternating current. Currently, we are required to have a production meter that measures all of that solar energy, and then that gets sent out to the grid. This is how we're setting up the majority of solar installations right now in Washington State. And the main vehicle that's allowing for that is a process that's known as net metering. I think most of you are familiar with that. By the way, I'm going to make this slide deck available to all of you, so feel free to hang around for that. Do we want solar in Washington? David brought up some really important hurdles to why solar integration can be problematic in different areas. I appreciate that he mentioned the duck certainly is a baby duck in Washington. Part of why that's the case is we have a really unique load trend in Northwest and the Pacific Northwest, and we also have the benefit of a lot of hydro, which happens to be right now one of the cheapest and most effective battery systems in the world. Lucky us. Hopefully we can protect that hydro capacity long term. We've been seeing the new fire season coming online in the summers, and we want to protect that hydro reserve both for our generating capacity as well as for our ability to circumvent any kind of fires that hit our region. Do we want solar? Well, it's here, and the economy is vibrant right now. On the last solar census, 3,400 jobs in the industry here in Washington State. You can see the heat map there. Of course, King County being where the most commerce is done. But we've got a pretty solid economy here in Whatcom County as well. So go us. Solar generating capacity, I like to show this just to give you guys a frame of reference as far as what our generating capacity is in the Northwest compared to elsewhere in the country. We like to throw in Frankfurt there just because they're one of the four-steppers and forefathers of the solar industry. They were integrating a lot earlier than the rest of the world. So sure, solar works, and this is how. So as you can see, that curtailment and load problems can sometimes happen in the summertime when we're generating quite a bit more than load tends to be. This is actually tending to change right now as we see more uptake of ductless heat pumps, and with warming summers, people are starting to cool their homes with ductless heat pumps. So we're going to see, the Northwest Energy Council has put some interesting data out there as far as load shift and late summer loads coming online, and there's certainly a use case for solar to alleviate that. This is a generation capacity analysis that would be typical for a 24-panel system that would be installed facing south in Bellingham. Charles, please don't kill me for my annual pounds of carbon offset. I'm using EPA numbers. What do they know? Growth trends worldwide, this is Navigant research. I'll blow through these because I don't have a ton of time. US market is following a similar curve as worldwide, with utility scale really becoming online and becoming feasible here. And then Washington is following a similar curve. So we're seeing, the hockey stick trending up with solar adoption. This came from Puget Sound Energy's Solar Summit Solar Roundtable, last summer. Just a heat map of Puget Sound Energy's territory and where solar is being integrated. So there's a nice red coloration there in the city of Bellingham. So we've got a lot of distribution here. Western Solar and Ecotech Energy are the two main contractors here in Bellingham. We represent 76% of the solar that's been installed in Whatcom County and 60% in Whatcom and Skagit added together. Kittitas County has a lot of solar. Turns out being on the east side of the Cascades is beneficial there. Statewide, we've got about 62 megawatts of built-out capacity now, and as far as 2018 was concerned, and nearly 8,000 customers just in PSE's territory alone. kind of honing in. Please ignore the numbers that are on here. I'm not sure what they mean. They're certainly not installed customers. We've got almost 1,200 customers in the city of Bellingham and 8 megawatts deployed here. This was all provided by Leslie Moynihan at PSE and is up to date as of January 1st. I threw this in here to try to demonstrate the average system cost. Sorry that the graphics are not great. If you look at the kind of left-hand side, you can see Oregon and Washington huddled together as we are below the national average. So this is the installed cost per watt, which is kind of how the industry determines where we're at as far as pricing. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see some bar graphs. Average cost per watt on that bar graph, this is actually coming from WSU Energy Program, who's the solar administrator in this state. They have us quite a bit higher than $3 a watt. There's some reasons. There's in the last year and a half, there's been some solar installers that have come into Washington that have been jacking the price up and taking advantage of some pretty generous solar incentives. So that's changed the average cost per watt in the state. But I can tell you, representing 76% of the installed capacity built out in Whatcom County, that actual price here for a typical 12-panel system is $230 to $260 a watt. So well below both the state and national average. This is a super busy little chart here. Again, I'll make this available. You can Google this. National Renewable Energy Laboratory has statistics out there on solar module efficiency. We get this question a lot. People are always wanting to wait out for the most effective module on the market. It's not happening. Those purple numbers are largely built for solar modules destined for outer orbit and are not cost effective terrestrially. But, if you want to buy a module at $50 a watt, go ahead. Solar module construction. Not all solar modules are made equal, and it's always important from an installation and design perspective to make sure that we're not damaging the module before it reaches its home on someone's roof or yard. Microfractures can start small on that image to the left, and they can exacerbate over time, causing full holistic cell failure. So making sure you handle the modules with care and are installing them in such a way that protects that module is quite important. All right, I'm going to try to slow down a little bit now, since this is the kind of nitty-gritty stuff that's relevant to the committee. Module level rapid shutdown is a new requirement in Washington state that came down through the adoption of the 2017 National Electric Code. It requires that every module that's placed in service on the roof of either a commercial building or a residence needs to have a disconnecting means at that module. A module referring to, in this instance, is just a solar panel. We use that term interchangeably. So that's a good sign. Ultimately, that means systems are arguably safer. It also means that if there is cell failure or module failure, we'll likely have monitoring attached to that. We'll be able to know that. And there's going to be a warranty attached to that module. Good. Well, what does this mean as far as dollars and cents? Module level rapid shutdown typically is adding about 10 to 15 cents a watt to system cost. So that's a new embedded price that we're having to deal with. This is what module level rapid shutdown typically looks like on a roof. The picture on the top right there shows microinverters, which is one way of achieving that standard, where each panel has its own dedicated unit. You don't need to have optimization as a part of this requirement, but it sure helps production, especially in a state where we have trees and chimneys and different roof pitches and all that jazz. As far as the services that we as an industry provide, our main bread and butter is determining whether solar is a good fit for the end user. And so, again, like all modules not being created equal, well, certainly not all roofs are created equal as well. And so in order to determine the feasibility of a site, you really need to do an actual study, get up there and take some solar measurements. That can be done via software. I'm old-fashioned and like to actually get up there with some measurements and test it all out, because satellite photos tend to change. I wanted to chat briefly about fire setback requirements. There is a standard that came through California that was adopted in the WAC that requires residential setbacks that allow for rooftop access in the case of a fire. Jim Tinner at the City of Bellingham has been super instrumental in exempting the City of Bellingham from needing residential fire code setbacks. Thank you, Jim, wherever you are. That is not the case for commercial. So currently the City of Bellingham looks at commercial property on a case-by-case basis. The requirement says that there needs to be a 4-foot setback from east and west edge, rooftop, and gutter. So I threw this in here just to show you on a small farm, you know, a farmer comes in and says, hey, I want to go solar. That's what we're forced to quote them. So I would love to see something done in the city code that creates a process to which this is no longer a problem. This is a larger system example. Larger, you know, I think what we could do is essentially carve out residential-like structures as having an exemption for commercial. This was Ludke Trucking that went solar here in November and December. They had plenty of room for a 4-foot setback. Not a big deal. So it really, you know, it comes down to, well, is the fire jurisdiction at hand doing rooftop ventilation? Are they accessing the roof in the event of a fire? Do we really need to be creating these fire lanes if that's not something that we're doing? Yeah, I'm happy to continue that conversation, but I think that's something that we could do that kind of follows. It would cost the city very little to nothing potentially, and would certainly help us implement more solar locally. Something that it sounds like the task force has been chatting quite a bit about is community solar, and there are some significant barriers around community solar adoption currently in Washington state. There is not right now legislation that is changing community solar, although there's several groups that are working on that, but it is a problem. Currently the 30% federal income tax credit that applies to solar installations only is applicable in community solar applications if the investor has passive income. You know, legislators and policymakers like to really champion community solar as a means for low-income folks to invest in solar and be a part of it, while most low-income folks don't have passive income to access that 30% tax credit. My PSC friends here will probably roll their eyes at me when I mention virtual net metering, but virtual net metering is not available in Washington state, and we're not currently, SIW is not currently asking for that, but it certainly would help the adoption of community solar. Loss of funding in the production incentive program is certainly a problem with the adoption of community solar in the state, as well as just administrators are difficult to find. Administering a community solar system typically is a little administratively onerous, and that tends to lead to burnout. We've installed, Western Solar as an organization has installed about 13 community solar projects in the state. And then investors are also difficult to find, and they're expensive to find. So what do we have? Well, we've got a 30% tax credit. That ends the end of this year. So 30% until the end of 2019. Then it will sunset to 26%, 22% in 2021, and then 10% in the following year. Of course, we've got an election between now and that sunset. So hopefully we can do something there federally, but that's what we're working with right now. There is a bill around net metering. It's Senator Palumbo's bill, SB 5223S. We're currently working with utility stakeholders, both investor-owned and public utilities, to work through the details of this. This bill would increase the threshold of net metering to 4% of peak load in 1996. In plain English, that means 1% of revenue. This is really tricky because most legislators that see 4% and think that's 4% of power sales. It's not, it's 1%. Currently, our energy mix of solar in the state is less than 0.25% of total energy sold. So we can definitely do better. I'm bullish there. California's 6 or 7%. There's a lot of talk about cost shifting. I call total bull honky there, not at the rates we're seeing adoption at. Solar has a long road of growth in Washington State, and Bellingham has a big role to play there. We are working with stakeholders in the bill. It sounds like utilities really want us to define what happens after 4% of peak load is reached, and SIW is working right now on what is feasible for the industry and fair for installers, and will maintain the vibrant economy that we already have here. There's also a current limit. No systems that are larger than 100 kilowatts AC are eligible for net metering. And net metering, of course, is the ability to send electricity back to the utility when you're not needing it. You bank that power effectively, and then you can use that electricity when generation is low. Secondary incentives, we have a USDA REAP grant. There's a loan program, and there's also a 100% bonus depreciation. Again, I'll make these slides available. The stuff is out there as well. Would like to just chat about the incentive program. I'd mentioned already that funding is now exhausted. So we have burned through now $110 million of funding for solar incentives in Washington State, which means that the legacy program is now closed. No customers who are installing systems today are guaranteed any incentives from Washington State. The counter-argument to that as well is those incentives were designed to help customers adopt solar early, and the cost has come down. Good for us. We're much lower than the national average, so let's move on. And the industry's perspective as well, we designed this incentive program to create an off-ramp on incentives, and we'd like to continue that ramp because any end to a ramp ends up just being a cliff. So this is what we're looking at. There's discussion about, there's talk right now of an upfront rebate with a sales tax exemption to supplant the current incentive program. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions about what we're pushing at the state level. I thought I'd throw in some sample pricing for just a standard 5.4 kW system. Without any incentives from Washington State and the federal tax credit at 30%, we're looking at about a 15-year payback right now. So it sure isn't as good as the 5-year payback that we had with state incentives. That said, the sales tool that all sales companies use is, well, what is the cost of your power over the next 25 years versus adoption of solar, and that is ubiquitously less. We're fixing costs when you're installing a solar system, provided net metering's there, which is why that legislation is critically important to the industry. Western Solar does a lot of work in the community. We'd like to donate solar to awesome nonprofits. We've done that over the years. We've partnered with Ecotech, our competitor in town, and we'll continue to do that as long as we are able to. That's all I got. Thanks, y'all.